Have you already implemented sustainable plastics into your medical device? If you want to learn how we can help you save at least 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of plastic, you can book a discovery call with the link in the description. Let's form a better world with plastic. Our guest today is Monika Kriete. Monika is an expert for medical TPU and technical marketing manager at Lubrizol Medical Solutions. She studied material science at the University of Berlin and then moved into the polymer industry, working for Covestro before moving to Lubrizol in 2022, where she now supports her customers in matters of processing and material selection of medical TPUs. Here's our discussion. Hi, Monika, and welcome to the Radical podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
To kick things off, could you explain what exactly is a thermoplastic polyurethane, a TPU, and how do they look like chemically, and what are the key properties?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question to start off with, I think. So in the end, what characterizes polyurethane is basically the urethane bonding, which you get by reacting an isocyanate with an alcohol. And if you talk about TPUs, thermoplastic means you can melt it up. And we usually talk about hard and soft segments within a TPU. The hard segment consists of an isocyanate reacting with some short chain diols. This forms the hard segment, the hard block. And then you have a soft segment, which is a long chain diol again. And I think the versatility of TPU is coming by basically choosing different building blocks. So you have different options in terms of chemistry for the isocyanate as well as for the soft segment, the long chain diol. And this gives the final TPU different properties. And this is what makes, I think, the material very interesting. As I said, it's a very versatile material. That's why it's also, I think, used in very different applications.
So going into the key properties, what are the key properties of a thermoplastic TPU?
Yeah, so TPU is, I think, very well known for having a very high strength with especially thin walls. I think this is one of the main reasons why TPU is used in a lot of the catheter applications, for example. Just having being very durable, having a great abrasion resistance. And one unique property about TPUs is the in-body softening, which means if you heat the TPU up to, let's say, body temperature, the flexural modulus will drop, so it will become more flexible while still keeping the tensile properties pretty much the same. And this can be very beneficial for some medical devices where you just want to minimize maybe the discomfort for the patient if you introduce, let's say, a catheter into the body, and just also minimizing the risk of any rupture inside the vessels.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So a key property that we to just assume to be, let's say, known to everybody, but it's actually not the case, is that TPUs are elastic. They're thermoplastic elastomers. So they are not a hard plastic. They're something that is designed to be soft and flexible. Let's talk a little bit about hardness and the elasticity. What range can we have there? And you could also describe that in layman's terms. So something that is very soft or something that is rubber-like or whatever. What can we achieve with a thermoplastic TPU, and what advantages does the elasticity bring?
Yeah, so as I said, you can cover really broad range in terms of properties, depending on what building blocks you take to manufacture the TPU. You can play around with the shore hardness by just, let's say, varying the ratio of hard versus soft segment. And by that, you can reach, I would say, if we look at our portfolio, it might start at like a shore 65A hardness, and we go up to like a 75D or even higher with our most rigid type TPU, which is ISO+, which is then comparable to more like a polycarbonate hardness. So that kind of shows the really versatility of TPU without maybe having to add additives to reach these final properties, but really just by playing around with the ingredients, so to say, that you take into the synthesis. Yeah.
So let's go into the typical applications of a TPU. So you mentioned catheters. What other applications are typical?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the material so interesting in my job, because you really get to see so many different devices. As I said, depending on the chemistry you use, it can be beneficial for one or the other device. So we usually talk about a lot of class 2, class 3 devices, something like a pacemaker, any other long-term implantable catheters or ports. But we also go down to other, maybe more class 1 devices like a wound care dressing, some urinary catheters. So you see it's really a very broad field that you get in touch with, and I think that's what makes it also so interesting to work with the material.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a very interesting point. I think your company Lubrizol is one of a select few that offer implantable materials, because usually what you say is that medical grades are available on the market, but like not for implantable, because we don't do that. The risk is too high. Could you expand on like your portfolio on the implantable materials, and
Yeah,
what makes the difference between a medical grade and an implantable grade?
yeah, sure. So this depends a lot on where you're planning to implant your device later. So this is something which, let's say if a customer comes to us with an idea of what grade might be suitable for him, and I think the versatility of TPU can make it very hard for a customer to understand just by himself which grade might be the best suitable for his device, especially if you talk about long term. And one important factor there is what type of body contact you are trying to achieve later. Should it be like a long-term blood contact, or should it be maybe, let's say, in a gastric environment? Because this will decide a lot on what type of chemistry you should choose for your TPU, because this differs a lot than which type of chemistry is more biostable later in the body. So usually if we talk about long-term blood contact, where you need a really good oxidative and hydrolytic stability, what we do see is that our polycarbonate-based TPUs are usually the most biostable grades, whereas like a polyester, for example, is very susceptible to being attacked by water. So usually those would not be recommended for any like longer term contact or anything in the body. And if you talk about, let's say, a gastric device, in contrast to that, you might want to go with a polyether-based TPU, because from our experience, this shows due to the different environment, having like a very acidic environment in there makes the polyether ones more biostable in that case compared to like a polycarbonate-based one. And this is like an example of showing that it's really important also from our side to understand what type of device you're looking for, what type of use case you're looking for, because what we do see sometimes is that maybe people see in some literature that, let's say, polycarbonate based TPU is the most biostable one. But because their device is just in a very different type of body contact, they then suddenly run maybe into issues later in their clinical studies. And this is why we really are very passionate, I think, to really talk in a very early stage with our customers to understand which grade in the end would be the most suitable from our experience for especially long-term implants. Yeah.
You said there's something that I really agree with, is like the earlier you can get
Yeah.
to the customer, and the earlier you can define the requirements that a customer has, may that be in an implantable device or in a
Exactly.
low risk consumable,
Yeah.
you can reduce the compliance risk, you can reduce the cost, and
Yeah.
you can reduce the project risk
That's
overall.
true.
So
And I would say, apart from, let's say, biostability, I think other factors is also how you want to process the material. So there are grades which are maybe better for extrusion, not so good for injection molding. So I think this is all questions we ideally want to clarify before, because this will just hopefully just reduce the complications that the customer faces later on. So I think along the whole process chain, it's really, I think, important to understand each and every step, ideally, to really make sure that you're not running into any issues. Maybe later on, maybe like a post-processing step or anything else. But I think it's, the whole picture, I think, is really important, which we usually try to clarify beforehand. Yes.
Okay. So you might also explain how you go about when a customer comes to you and says, I have this device, may that be implantable or not.
Yeah.
How do you go about consulting them on choosing the right TPU?
Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned, I think one of the first questions is to understand where should it be placed in the body and how long should it stay there? Is it just going to be a few hours maybe for like an interventional procedure, for example? Should it be like a long-term implantable device? This is, I think, the main thing to kind of narrow down on the chemistry we would recommend. And then other questions, as I mentioned, is something like, what type of processing are you planning to do? So the TPUs can be melt processed, but also solvent processed. And there are grades, as I mentioned, which are not doing so great in, let's say, injection molding because they can be very sticky and very difficult to demold. So these are all factors we try to clarify. And then other things like, what type of sterilization are you planning to do? Some grades, and this goes down to the isocyanate chemistry. If it's an aromatic type isocyanate, they might turn yellow with certain sterilization methods, and this can be an issue for some devices. It's usually really just a color effect, not any degradation type, but it's obviously something which should be considered if this is really a critical factor. So any post-processing steps, is there like an assembly step later, or are you planning to maybe connect it to other type of materials? I think all these things are important to understand, I think, beforehand, yeah.
Okay. Yes. And then when you have all these requirements, you have your portfolio, you can select which grade is the best from your portfolio. You mentioned also the processing of TPUs and how that can be challenging. In my experience, you're completely right. The stuff sticks to everything. That can be an advantage, however. So you can do like overmolding and with TPUs, and they're very suitable for that. So they stick to other stuff. Which you can use to like injection mold it onto metal or onto other plastics. What other processing issues do you often see?
Yeah, and just commenting on the stickiness, I would say there are certain trends within, let's say, a chemistry which goes from very sticky to less sticky, or maybe certain chemistries which are less. But yeah, depending on what you're looking for, obviously, yeah, some of them can be a bit challenging. But I would say the main key requirement, if you look at melt processing TPU, is really to make sure you have the right drying equipment. And I think I still remember when I started my job, I didn't really believe that it's really going to be mainly this issue which maybe customers face, but it oftentimes really goes down to having the TPU properly dried before melting it up. And the reason why that is so important is because if you don't have it dry enough, the moisture which is present while melting can basically disrupt the chains of the polymer and can lead to reduced physical properties of your final product. In that process, also looking at aromatic TPUs, there can also be some volatile substances coming out which you do not want, and it can just lead to a lot of fluctuation in your process. And this is why we do recommend for aromatic type TPUs, it's like a residual moisture of 0.02 before melt processing, and for aliphatic type 0.05. And we do have like a whole guide on the right drying equipment. Let's say desiccant dryer is something which works usually best. It's basically a hygroscopic material which will take up moisture very quickly. And it's really important to just dry it and then also keep it dry before melt processing it. And another key factor, I think, is to ideally really measure the moisture every time before you start the process, which is maybe just done with a very simple weight loss analyzer. But this is usually what we see works best, just to take a sample each time before you want to melt up the material, because oftentimes it's maybe not as simple as having the wrong drying equipment, but it can also be you have the right setup, but something is not working properly, which you just cannot see from the outside. And I think this is something which happens more often than you think, that maybe there is some malfunction in the system and you might not realize that it's maybe not drying as it should, or it just takes for some reason much longer than you would expect. So I do think this is one of the key recommendations we make, to maybe invest in a weight loss analyzer just to make sure that you really always start with the right moisture content before melting it up.
Yeah, so you wouldn't expect that it's always the easy stuff that people stumble over, but it's it's
Really, I
usually
think
the
once you
easy
have that
stuff.
sorted out, you really have the majority of problems, I think, out of the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your insights. So the second method that you mentioned would be solvent processing. Explain how that would work.
Yeah. So basically you can choose different solvents and dissolve the TPU in that. And this is usually used if you want to create very thin coatings or like membranes, for example, which means you can just take a very small amount of TPU, dissolve it in your solvent, and then maybe dip coat it over your structure, and by that create very thin layers. We do have certain grades where which really optimize for this process, which means we take out all the other additives which you would need for a melt processing, like a lubricant, for example, which could then show up as like a hazy optical feature in your solution. So there are some optimized grades for that, and this is something which we do see, let's say, a growing demand in the last few years, that people tend to use these kind of processes to really create maybe some coatings or some membranes for the devices.
Okay. And where would you use such a coating?
So you can either use it, maybe we have some grades which are more hydrophilic, so you could maybe use it to make a device more hydrophilic, or you can use it to maybe make it more biocompatible, let's say in a whole device, to just coat the whole structure, and by that making it more biocompatible, to put it inside the body. And another one is using it like as a membrane, let's say, can be used in glucose sensors, for example, where it's then functioning as a semi-permeable membrane. And this is also where you usually use a solvent process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. What you mentioned before was the residuals of isocyanates. Isocyanates are substances of concern, and there is the chance in the TPU that the monomer, an isocyanate, a substance of concern, can show up on the leachables, and that is always like a risk in using a TPU. Could you like speak to that and address it?
Yeah, exactly. As mentioned before, there are some key principles, let's say, in the synthesis of TPU, which just speak to having a very low chance of having these free isocyanates present in the final TPU, which comes down a lot to the kinetics of the reaction. As I said, we use like a step growth polymerization, and in that, the speed of what this chain would react with a free isocyanate is much quicker than it would do with like another chain, which just leads to those free isocyanates being used up much more quicker and being like the first, how do you say, reactive material of choice, which means they will used up much like at first. I think this is the key thing which makes it very unlikely to have them present. Obviously, we do test our pellets on biocompatibility, for example. So this is something we can offer to our customers. We do perform these testings on our pellets. Doesn't mean that the final customer is not responsible anymore for testing it on their final device, but it obviously gives some confidence in having that this material is suitable for the medical devices. And overall, TPU is used for a very long time in the medical industry. So as I said, there's a very low chance. There are certain ways how you can test for it. I would also say in that regard, we are happy to guide a bit on how you can test for those, because some test methods might show up, let's say, a false result, because, for example, if you do like a IR analysis, they might show up as like a isocyanate, whereas it's actually just an end group of like a longer chain, which is an isocyanate group, which can lead to maybe a false result in thinking there might be free isocyanates, but it's in the end just the end group of the chain. And also for other methods, there are some things to consider just to make sure that you're not creating those free isocyanates while measuring it. So these are things where we are really happy to help our customers or to guide them if they have these concerns or if they're testing for it, because it's not maybe as straightforward as you also might think to really test for those free isocyanates.
Yeah, but as with, I imagine, as with all of the polymers that have a, let's say, monomer of concern, there are others. I mean, polycarbonate has the bisphenol A, then you have the POM that has the formaldehyde. You will never get rid of everything, because there is always a little bit of monomer in there, like a very, very small percentage, a very, very, very small residual, because you also can have the, let's say, degradation of your polymer chain. So you have to make sure that and that is speaking to what you said, we have to know in which environment do we want to put this polymer, and is it stable in there. So if you put it like in a environment where it tends to biodegrade, then you will get the free isocyanates, and then we will have biocompatibility issues. Is that what you see? And therefore, you're also very, very keen on selecting the right material.
I wouldn't necessarily say that free isocyanates come out of that, but it's, for example, something which you would consider for processing it. I think having like a lower content of moisture in your pellets, for example, is something you wouldn't see MDI coming out of it if you then process the TPU with water being present, but it's just something where other substances can come out of the TPU which you might not want. So I do think this is maybe the main factor where we do see either problems for cytotoxicity later, maybe because people might not have processed it in the way that we recommend in terms of moisture.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much for your insights. Coming to my absolutely favorite topic, sustainability. I mean, I have this great analogy that probably long-term listeners of the podcast are already sick of. I'm not. So what I usually say is like sustainable plastics. You have to look at like the risk of the device. So you will never like choose a implant for its sustainability reasons, because it's like
That's true.
it
Yeah.
will stay 15 years in the body, or some very long term. The impact of having a patient having
Hmm.
issues is the much bigger sustainability impact.
That's true. Yeah.
And it's just like from a risk reward ratio, it's like not the thing to target. However, like in consumables, in tubings and stuff like that, where you use a lot of mass, the devices tend to be single use.
Hmm.
There, it's certainly worth looking at better alternatives in terms of sustainability. And what I mean by sustainability, because this word also tends to
Yeah.
degrade
It's a
over
very broad
time.
term. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, it tends to degrade the word, because it's
Hmm.
what people mean by sustainability is they mean ecology. They mean better for the environment.
Yeah.
Because sustainability actually means it's like better for the environment, better for in a social aspect, which I would translate in medical
Hmm.
device to safety and compliance.
Yeah.
So, and third of all, also good for profitability. So it's
Hmm.
not that sustainable materials can cost like X time more, because
Yeah.
like sustainability also incorporates the cost of the material. So what's
Yeah.
your take, and what's your, let's say, approach at Lubrizol to the whole sustainability thing?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think something that comes up more and more, obviously. I think, as you mentioned, it's not maybe so much of an issue for the implantable devices. I do think, obviously, there the key requirement is really having the safety of the patient. However, we as Lubrizol obviously are interested in moving towards like really serving sustainable solutions, which means we do have some internal projects which maybe evaluated some recyclability. Let's say we have some products. I mean, you mentioned consumables. I think one example would be for dental aligners. This is one product where one of our really rigid grades goes into, which is a monolayer film. And then you might cut out some discs and thermoform them to your invisible aligner, basically. In that process, you obviously have a lot of scrap maybe out of that film. So these are things where we looked at the recyclability, which is definitely there. However, we do not see so far, like, let's say, partners moving forward with it. We are really happy to have these discussions if a customer really wants to go into that direction. But for now, we are happy to do that work internally, but it's not something which we see a great demand for now. We do offer for especially our higher volume medical grades biomass balanced approach. So the site where those ones are manufactured is certified to offer these solutions. But also there, I would say people ask for it. I don't see a lot of really moving forward with it. And I guess it's something which maybe comes in the future. And obviously it's important to be prepared for that. But it's nothing that I would say we come across a lot. And I think if you talk about sustainability, I think you could argue that having a device which you can keep longer in the body, which you don't have to maybe use several devices to have it, because maybe the one device is not as biostable to keep it maybe in the body for longer, but instead of having just one device, or maybe being able to use thinner walls, like less material for your device. I mean, you could argue this could also be maybe more sustainable just by maybe saving material or maybe just going with one device instead of multiple devices. Yeah.
Have you already implemented sustainable plastics into your medical device? If you want to learn how we can help you save at least 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of plastic, you can book a discovery call with the link in the description. Let's form a better world with plastic. Yeah, I mean, the functional unit, that's always what has to be looked at. So if you can perform a function with one device instead of 5, that certainly helps in terms of sustainability. However, what I see, like for consumables, they're not going to be multi-use because of the reprocessing and re-sterilization and the safety concerns that you have with everything. That tends to be very tedious, also in terms of regulatory, and therefore I don't see single use go away. Therefore, what you can do is like use a better material, use a better feedstock to get your CO2 footprint down. And you obviously are offering such solutions in terms of mass balance, bio-based. But what do you see as the biggest challenge for adoption? Because you say you don't see it too much. You have it and customers know about it, but they really don't want to implement it. What's the challenge here?
I do think it might come with a change either in the naming, let's say. I mean, you might have to really make it somehow clear that this is now a biomass balanced version. And I would say maybe just simply by changing the name can maybe lead to problems at the customer by maybe having to requalify just because maybe there's maybe one letter more in the name. I think this is something which is maybe then more unique for the medical industry, where just by changing very small bits, maybe even of it, can just lead to a whole tail of maybe having to invest again money and time into maybe requalifying or maybe just showing that it's in the end the same product for the customer. No.
Do you think it's the regulatory challenge because it's like the change in name? I see that with like the very, very high risk devices, implants and catheters and stuff like that. So I really see that can be a challenge. So for everybody who does mass balance in medical, you want to have the same name for the grade, even if it's mass balanced. Even if for marketing purposes, it would be nice to have a separate grade name or a separate brand name. Don't, because you might make the approval more difficult.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you think that the premiums that you currently pay for mass balanced has something to do with adoption?
Yeah, that's definitely another point I was thinking of right now. Yeah. I mean, obviously it comes maybe at a slightly higher price point, and I don't think maybe right now people are willing to pay for that. So I do wonder a bit if it's something which, once it maybe rather gets enforced, is something which comes more. But I think this is maybe one of the bigger hurdles, especially for the higher volume applications, which obviously is a big pain point I can understand maybe for end customer. Yeah. Yeah.
So because like I see it as like a stalemate situation, because like the medical grade producers, they're like, yeah, we have it, just buy it, and then with volume prices will come down. And then the medical device manufacturers like, yeah, I'll wait until the prices are down until I buy. Then and that really makes it like a hen and egg situation.
True.
Which makes it really tough to move forward in this to make medical device more sustainable. I have a take. I think the devices that are on the market right now, legacy devices you might call them, they won't be changed. They won't be changed. What will happen is, like, for new devices, medical device manufacturers will go ahead and put eco design guidelines into their product development. And they will, for new devices, they will look at the sustainability. And that not only comes with material changes, but that will also come with business model changes, that will come with design optimizations. It will be a rethinking of how we do medical device. And that, I think that will bring the outcome that we are looking for in the long term. However, that is going to be slow, because medical devices tend to not change
It's
that
never
fast.
fast. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Okay. So looking ahead, what other future trends besides sustainability do you see in emerging in the field of medical TPUs?
I think there are several things which I think you could say as a trend. I think going more and more minimally invasive, for example, like really getting smaller and smaller with your devices by causing really less and less trauma to the patient is something which we see, just dimensions getting smaller, and by that obviously also more challenging maybe to manufacture. We do see a grow, I would say, in robotics, anything maybe which has to do with robotics, any surgeries or maybe anything in the surgery room being more done with robotics. And in general, I think thinking of some medical films, for example, I would say some just making devices overall smarter. I feel maybe adding more functionality to a single device, making it maybe more accessible for people to use it just at home, not just in the hospital, by bringing some of the therapies maybe rather to their home and not having people to have to go to the hospital. I do think this is maybe a few of the trends which we observe. And then, as I said, maybe going softer, for example, this is something which we do see a demand of maybe enlarging that side of the portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. So you said like we add more functionality to a medical device, which is like in my opinion, in my like sustainable medical device thinking,
Mm.
it's like reducing the function to its bare minimum is the first step you take. So number one is you go and you analyze what should the device do, and it should only do this. Because
Yeah.
if you add bells and whistles, you don't really need. So like imagine the microwave with like
Yeah.
50 buttons.
1,000 different functions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Nobody really
Yeah.
uses it. It's like
Yeah.
you use two buttons, and
That's true.
then you would go. First of all, you try to reduce it to the core function, and then you try to optimize how can I achieve this core function with the least amount of effort, and that
Yeah.
is like the first step. And you obviously will try to reduce components. You will try to reduce the material footprint, reduce substances of concern, and stuff like that. But like reducing the function is number one, and that is like a little contrary to like making devices smarter and adding
Hmm.
stuff to them. So what's your take on that?
Well, by adding functions, I mean more maybe, let's say, sensors, for example. I would see something I've seen for example, wound care dressings. Maybe people try to implement some sensors on measuring maybe more how the wound is healing, maybe some temperature or some other type of sensors in there.
Hmm?
And I think in the same way, maybe adding some other sensory functions to some other devices just to be able to maybe observe better the functionality of a device. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not only that; it's also to like to gather data, and data is
Yeah.
insight. And I mean,
True.
with the current capabilities that we have in machine learning in AI, if you
Yeah.
gather a lot of data, you can use this data to learn about your clinical use case. So it's like I think that can have real value, because you
Hmm.
have to balance the outcome of the patient with the impact of your device. So if I'm talking about sustainability, I'm not thinking about just like making the device as good as it can be, but like
Yeah.
also the patient journey as good as it can be. Because one day in a hospital is like the sustainability impact of 100 devices
Hmm.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So like you try to reduce the patient impact as much as possible also there. And with data you can do that. So it's not
Yeah.
even contrary. It's just like you have to really think about if you add that function or not, and what is
Yeah.
really the outcome of that function.
And it can maybe help to control if a device is about to fail, for example, or I mean, having some of these control mechanisms maybe added with a sensory function. I think this is something which can be obviously very beneficial for the outcome of the patient. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, good. So now to the, I would say, more personal part. What initially sparked your interest in material science, and what did draw you to thermoplastic elastomers and TPUs? Do you enjoy the podcast? Then subscribe and rate it on your platform. and join the discussion on LinkedIn. Your feedback and comments help us improve the podcast and bring relevant topics to you. Let's form a better world with plastics.
Yeah, good question. I have to think back. I do think what I found really attractive about material science was that you just get to learn a lot of different fields. So you get, I mean, once you study it, you really get in touch with chemistry, physics, the classic material science, mechanics. I think you get a glimpse into a lot of different areas, which I found very interesting. I would say it still led to some of the other identity crisis of feeling you just know everything a little bit, but nothing really properly. But I do really appreciate actually just the ability now to, first of all, maybe just connect different groups. I think these interdisciplinary functions are getting more and more important. And I think it just gives you a broad variety of things you can go into later. I did focus in my master then on polymers because I do think they are, yeah, I mean, not just TPU in general, very versatile. I mean, if you see where else they're used in our daily lives, it's really something which I don't think will go away so quickly. So, and then I think if you talk about TPUs, I think this is something which I got in touch with here at Lubrizol, and I really love the versatility, as I mentioned. I think the kind of devices we are working with is really inspiring, and to see kind of what is really out there and what things people are working on is really impressive every day. And for now, I don't think I could really imagine going out of the medical industry again. I do think it's a really inspiring field, and a really just motivating, I guess, to spend your time on these kind of projects and devices. Yeah.
Okay. Just remind me, like Covestro also has TPUs, but you didn't work on them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, I was back there. I was in the polycarbonate business, so more focused on polycarbonate processing. Yeah.
Okay. And how would you compare like your daily life working with polycarbonate versus with TPUs?
My daily life. So I would say the position was very different because it was really in a production environment back there, which was, I think, great to just learn really hands-on the difficulties of, let's say, a production environment and just the processing of the material, which now in my current position, I do get to just visit a lot of different customers. I'm maybe not as much anymore on the line itself, unless maybe a customer has a issue and I'm happy to come there for a trial, obviously, but it's comparatively maybe more work where you just are not every day in the production. So I do think in that matter, it's obviously very different. And it was back there also industrial applications. So also there, I think very different in terms of, I would even say in terms of how you interact with customers. I do think in the medical field, the interactions are much more appreciative, I would say. So I really enjoy, as I said, really working in that field. And I don't think I could imagine going back for now.
Yeah. I mean, I love the medical field too. That's appreciative is a very nice word. So it's like not as I wouldn't say competitive, but it's like there's other industries. I won't name names here, but they're like very adversarial in terms of like the supplier and
I think relations are just very different. I think how you handle them. So
so it's like really a power dynamics, like I win, you lose approach. And I think in medical is like more collaborative and more like long term, because in the end, and customers know this, and you know this too, if you have a polymer in a medical device or a material in a medical device, you guys are married for the life of this device. And
hopefully a happy marriage.
Yes, and the best marriages have good communication and appreciative manner. If it starts to be adversarial, like divorces are very, very costly. So to change materials, and we have to say this, it's very costly. You don't want to do it.
That's true. And I think that's also why if we really get a project and we really see that TPU might not be the best material for it, I think we are really open to it, because in just communicating that as well, because I don't think any of the sites will be happy in moving forward and just running into a whole different problems. So I do think this is something from both sides, which I think everyone wants to avoid. So I do think this is something where we're not just going to try to sell TPU everywhere where we can. I think it's really something where we are passionate about really finding the right material, and maybe if it's not TPU, then also not going forward with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like be as harsh to the polymer industry overall, but I think that is something that makes you a little special, because what my experience says is that if I go to a polymer manufacturer and say, hey, give me a material recommendation for this, they will give you a material recommendation for this. That is just the best they can do for that particular device from their portfolio. Doesn't mean that it's the best material on the market, because they're not independent. They want to sell their material, and like the application technicians are there to help you choose their plastic that is best. And that is, I think, not to be like too much of a self advertisement here. That is the advantage of having an independent material selection, such as we offer. I think that's a really advantage that I have with my business, is that I am really, really independent. And because not everybody is like, yeah, I think our material is not a good fit, I think you should go look somewhere else. Because most of the polymer suppliers are like, yeah, please take this, it's the best we can do. And in medical device, best we can do usually doesn't cut it. It has to be perfect.
Yeah. You don't want to hear that. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, good.
And I would say, I mean, with Lubrizol, we do have a dedicated portfolio for really medical TPUs, medical devices, which is something which is specifically designed for really being extremely biostable, biocompatible, which is maybe another thing which maybe some other companies might not have. But I think the experience also in-house, just in the whole field, is really impressive. And I think the type of support we can give if there's any issue also on the way, I think it's always great also from our labs or for our other colleagues for application engineering, for example. Yeah.
Okay, cool. To my favorite part now. What advice would you like to give to our listeners in terms of TPU?
Well, I would say, first of all, dry the TPU before processing. We do say usually don't try it unless you dry it. I think this is the key message. And I think it's extremely, as I said, exciting material, really versatile. And I'm really happy to every day work with different projects for the TPU. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for your insights and that you came on my podcast. It was a very interesting conversation. Learned a lot. Do you have any last words?
I can just everyone recommend also who thinks of going into the medical industry. I think, as I said, can highly recommend. And I'm hoping to get, I think you talked in other episodes before, right? That it's maybe difficult to get new people into this field of also polymer processing. And I do think it's something which I find really motivating every day. So it's just, hopefully it motivates maybe some more people to explore this field.
Yes, I hope that too. So thank you very much. This was Monika Kriete from Lubrizol. And until the next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Have you already implemented sustainable plastics into your medical device? If you want to learn how we can help you save at least 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of plastic, you can book a discovery call with the link in the description. Let's form a better world with plastic.